Hi everyone. This recording is going to serve as your lecture for the current week. So please make sure that you watch it before Wednesday and or Thursday's class so that you're ready for our activities. We're going to cover chapters 2 and chapters 3 from your book. I know some of you said that chapter 2 in particular is a little bit overwhelming. There's really not as much that you need to know out of chapter 2. We're going to focus a little more on chapter 3. So let's kind of go ahead and get started talking about theories of aging from chapter 2. So those of you that have already had the theory class will remember that we use theory to just help us understand and conceptualize a particular concept, in this case aging, and kind of look at explaining why certain things occur universally. And so when we look at the basic theories in gerontology about aging, we see some just general assumptions that come out. First of all, aging takes place over time. It's not one thing in time, but we see that the actual time that aging takes place has increased substantially in the last several decades as technology has come in and we've been able to extend life beyond what we were, considering like 100 years ago. So in that sense, old age is a relatively new concept. We want to distinguish, just like we talked about in class, aging is different from disease. So everyone, assuming that they live to a certain age, goes through the process of aging, where we begin to see a breakdown of some of the functions and capacities of the body and the skills that we have. And that's different than actually having a health issue or a disease. When we are treating our clients who have specific diseases, like maybe chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder, or they've had a CVA, we need to keep in mind that that is layered on top of the normal aging process. The other thing that your book really points out is that there's no universally accepted theory of aging. And so that's why you see such a discussion of so many different concepts. You do not need to know all these different concepts. I'm going to kind of break it down for you a little bit on the next slide of what you really need to know. So what you really need to know about the categories of aging theory in this chapter are these three categories. That there's kind of three different ways that it's been approached, how to look at aging. And these aren't necessarily that one of these is better than the other, they just look at different things. So the three main categories are biological, and these types of theories address aging at the organism, molecular, and cellular levels. So these are things that look at kind of what's happening in the body. So for example, stochastic is one of those, and what that theory basically says is that there's genetic damage that occurs over time, and eventually it becomes incompatible with life when it reaches a certain level, and that's where we see aging, okay? The psychological theories, these draw from a variety of different fields, like cognition, personality, and social development fields, and these really almost look at more of aging from the personal level in terms of how an individual experiences aging. And so it might look more at like adaptation and things like that. So for example, one of those psychological theories is the personality and aging theory, and it really focuses on the extent and nature of personality and whether it's how stable it is versus changing over time and how that affects aging. And then we have the sociological categories of theory. These focus on participation and environment, or the context in which occupation occurs, as well as looking at the demands of activities and the environment. And these really almost look at the bigger picture in terms of how society impacts aging and things that are going on within society and how that impacts not so much the individual but the bigger picture. And so, for example, in the political economy of aging, which is one of those, the focus is really on what's happening in the economic and political forces within the environment in which the individual lives and how that affects the treatment and status of our elderly. Okay? So really, here's the takeaway from an occupational therapy perspective of Chapter 2. To understand that there's a wide variety of individual differences in aging, and so therefore we can expect that there are some aspect of all of these different theories at play when we look at the individual life of any one client. The other thing that we see is that all of that discussion that already took place about how aging occurs, we still need to integrate that with our specific domain, which is our focus on performance skills, performance patterns, client factors, and other issues related to satisfactory and satisfying occupational performance. So while all of that theory is important, keep in mind that as occupational therapists, what we are ultimately concerned with is the occupational performance of our clients. So we're going to spend the next few slides kind of looking at the power of occupation and the meaning of occupation. And I thought this was a pretty powerful quote from your book. Personal meaning is the hidden dimension of successful aging, because having a positive meaning and purpose in life will not only add years to one's life, but also add life to one's years. And so, at this point in your education, you should have a pretty good idea of what we're talking about when we use the word occupation, in terms of what types of activities are included in that. And if you don't feel like you have that, then you definitely want to get out the occupational therapy practice framework and kind of have that handy as a reference to you to look at what we're talking about. Because we're not going to spend any time on that right now. Instead, we're really just going to look at the meaning behind occupation. So we want to keep in mind that as people age and we begin to lose some of our performance skills, they're either changed or lost, we have to find different ways to do things that we want to do, or we have to find alternative roles and activities to replace those that are being lost. So there's kind of this constant struggle to maintain the things that are important to us against the impact of everything that's going on in life. The next theme of meaning is existential meanings, and this really relates back to that Erikson ego thread, but existential meanings, that so there is a component to our life where we look at, has my life been worth living? Have I made a contribution to the world around me? Here's where we might really see religion and or spirituality come into play in terms of people evaluating where they're at in life. Remember that religion and spirituality are not necessarily the same thing. For some people, they can be, but some people feel a very deep spirituality connection with life separate from religion. And so they're not always the same in all people. And as this again is as people really begin to contemplate the fact of their eventual death, they begin to look at wanting to leave a legacy and think about what is the legacy that I'm leaving behind as I prepare for my life to end. And then the fourth area of meaning is really related to self-identity. So your book has the quote, and we've probably seen this quote before, I know I have within other occupational therapy literature, that we are what we do, that really it's all of our occupations and roles and activities throughout our daily life that tell us kind of who we are as a person and what our identity is. Very closely related to self-identity is this feeling of self-efficacy, being able to feel like you are in control of your life and that you have the ability to make decisions. And so we can really see that as this is really important, that even as people lose maybe the physical ability to do some of the tasks that are important to them, they still should have opportunities to exercise control over things. And that's one of the things that we really struggle with when we look at some of the current institutional models that even to this day exist within nursing homes and things like that, and people not having control over what time they get up, when they do their shower, whether it's in the morning or afternoon, and all those types of things. So you can see that here comes in kind of that idea of intrinsic versus extrinsic. Do I get to make decisions or does someone make them for me? Your book talks about some of the things that really contribute to a positive self-identity, and one of the things that they mention is having a sense of optimism, having the ability to feel like things can turn out well and that you have the possibility of continuing to grow as a person. Having a perceived usefulness, so feeling like you can contribute to whatever your living situation is, and that there's something there for you to be able to contribute to the bigger picture. And so for many individuals who've kind of completed some of those previous life tasks like work and raising children, the activity of volunteering might be a way to kind of address this self-identity. That is just one way that we could do that. So to sum up kind of the book's discussion about occupation and meaningful occupation, just really want to remind you that difference between activity versus occupation. Activities become occupation when the individual themselves see it as meaningful. So it's not for us to decide what is a meaningful occupation for our client. It's for our client to really make that determination. And so we need to be open to a wide variety of different activities and tasks that we can engage them in and really find out from them what they're going to find meaningful. And, thinking about some of the things that influence meaning, environment, context, and outcomes. So those are all factors that as the therapist, you have some control over in terms of changing the way that you provide an activity within your treatment session that can make it seem more or less like an occupation. So the more that we can do tasks in their natural environment, the more we can use the natural context of things, then it has more meaning. If I go into a client's room and I want to evaluate their toilet transfers and they don't need to use the bathroom right then, it's not going to be as meaningful to them. They're maybe not going to be able to relate their performance in a practiced situation to how they'll do at home as much as if we actually, it's a time when they really need to use the bathroom, and there's all those other contextual demands of, oh, I need to use it now, and so can I get my clothing out of the way in time, and what's really here in the environment in terms of support for me to hold on to as I lower myself to the toilet, and all those types of things. That's kind of a strange example to give you, but it's the first one that came to my mind. And the other thing that we want to remember is that the ultimate goal of occupational therapy service is well-being and not necessarily health. We cannot always change or influence the health of our client, but we can influence the well-being, the way that the client perceives their ability to participate in what is meaningful to them. Now, Chapter 3 in your book does also briefly touch on some of the occupational therapy theories and models that we have available to utilize with our clients as well. And so you should all remember, if you haven't had the theory class yet, even from intro, you should remember that within OT, we have 3 different levels of theory that we're typically looking at. We have the paradigm, which is that overarching theory or level of theory that kind of tells us what is occupational therapy, what is our concern. And so things like the occupational therapy practice framework and our code of ethics and things like that are what make up that paradigm. Then we have that middle level, which are our occupation-based models. And these are models that help us to really focus on occupation and to see that as our primary concern. And then the third level, which we're not going to get into a whole lot, are more of those practice-based intervention type theories. And I apologize, I'm blanking on the name that we've used in our previous discussions about that. But those are the level of theory, frames of reference. Frames of reference actually tell us, kind of how to intervene with a specific diagnosis. So here we're going to talk a little bit about occupation-based models, and the 3 that this chapter briefly touches on page 54 are the model of human occupation, the occupational adaptation model, and the PEOP, or person environment occupational performance model. And I'm not going to spend time discussing those here. I put links into the Module 2 overview page for you. So before you come to class later this week, if you will just kind of refresh yourself a little bit with these 3 models, either by looking at page 54 in your book, looking at previous class notes, or taking a quick peek at some of the links that are on the Module 2 overview page, that'll help you be ready for what we're going to do in class. And finally, to kind of get ready to have you apply the information from these 2 chapters in class, take a look at the case study for Emma on page 57. We're going to do an activity with Emma, and so read that over so that you have a little bit of familiarity with her. I will see you in class. Thanks for your attention.